The end of an era. After 30 years in power, the African National Congress is set to lose its parliamentary majority. But will a less powerful ANC mean a more effective coalition government? Or should the country prepare for the potential chaos of fractured leadership? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is South Africa. It's a historic moment for South Africa, with voters sending a clear message to the party that helped liberate them from apartheid. Under Nelson Mandela, the ANC oversaw the transition from white minority rule to democracy and helped build South Africa into a model of freedom and prosperity. But over the course of 3 decades, many South Africans say the ANC succumbed to greed and corruption, evident in the decline of service delivery and a struggling economy. Since 2011, South Africa's economy and its currency, the rand, have been in steady decline. From a GDP per capita approaching $9,000 13 years ago to just $6,700 today. The country suffers from some of the highest inequality in the world, with more than half the population living in poverty. The election results reflect the public's frustration. The ANC has been in power since 1994. At its helm for the last 6 years is Cyril Ramaphosa. He's a former anti-apartheid activist and a very wealthy businessman. He took the reins after former President Jacob Zuma resigned under pressure, facing numerous corruption allegations. Now, the Democratic Alliance is the biggest opposition party, garnering over 20% of the vote. Its leader, John Steenhuisen, heads a broadly centrist party that supports spending on social services, such as education and healthcare. It's also committed to fostering private business and increasing the number of police officers to counter violent crime. Now abbreviated as the MK Party, Mkhonto weSizwe is led by former President Jacob Zuma, who has broad support among the Zulu people. Zuma, though, is unable to stand as a candidate because of a conviction for contempt of court. MK believes in nationalizing mining firms, redistributing land without compensation, and granting more powers to local traditional leaders. And with policies similar to MK, the EFF describes itself as a radical movement for economic emancipation. It was formed in 2013 and is led by former ANC youth leader Julius Malema. It's fared poorly at the ballot box, securing just under 10%. So with the ANC losing its majority, South Africa now delves into the often messy process of building a government. There will have to be a coalition formed for the first time since the end of apartheid. But how can such disparate parties come together? Former President Jacob Zuma has taken his revenge on the ANC, gaining enough votes to end their domination, but not enough to call the shots. The parties remain tight-lipped over the horse trading that's about to begin. Nevertheless, the election will lead to a huge shift in South Africa's governance, one where the opposition has a much louder voice.
Well, look, I think it's a very good day for South Africa. When I said, tomorrow is a better country, well, today is a better country. We said for the last 30 years that the way to rescue South Africa is to break the ANC's majority. We've done that. They're going to end up in the low 40s. And that obviously opens up a whole new universe for politics in South Africa, for us to break the log jams and to start building something better for the people of South Africa and our country.
So is it a good day for South Africa, or is this a government in disarray with no clear coalition in sight? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Port Elizabeth, Member of Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighters and former spokesperson for Jacob Zuma, Mzwanele Manyi. And in Johannesburg, political economist and senior research fellow at the trade collective Lebohang Pheko. Thanks both so much for being with me. Lebohang, I'll start with you. We heard the DA leader saying that, this breaks the logjam, he called it, and they've pledged to stop the ANC from forming a coalition with MK and EFF, saying that would be a disaster for the economy. So I know you're an economist, but I need to ask you this first. How real do you think the possibility is that the ANC and the DA would work together?
Anything is possible, particularly because we're living in the era of political expediency. And I think the seduction of power and the need, the compulsion to hold on to power is going to create some interesting and perhaps unexpected bedfellows. So I think, we know that in politics, there are no permanent friends, no enemies. And I think we've already seen that many of the political parties that have emerged in South Africa over the last 5 or 10 years actually emerged from the politics of either grievance or perhaps ideological difference, and in many cases, personality differences and so on. And yet we see the same formations at provincial level, at local government level, cobbling together coalitions and cobbling together working relationships, some of them very successful, some of them not so successful. So anything is possible. And I also believe that it's not per se the purview of the Democratic Alliance. I think they overstate their own power and influence by suggesting that it is they who have who can decide with whom any party goes into a coalition with any other party. They are a party among the others.
Yeah. Still, though, I mean, it would, though, make sense. You talk about political expediency, because in spite of their fringe elements, between the DA and kind of the ANC, they are the two biggest and most politically experienced parties. They know how to get political work done. So it could be arguably good for South Africa, could it not, as far as political expediency is concerned?
So I think it's arguable whether they know how to get things done. Looking at the track record of the African National Congress over the last 30 years, that is, I think that does not bear great scrutiny, and I'm happy to.
Lebohang, looks like we've lost her connection. Let's get that reestablished, and we'll come back to her as soon as possible. So let me ask then, Mzwanele, if you agree with that analysis there, that yes, it is possible. Could it arguably be good for the country, even though this isn't the parties that you would prefer to see in power?
No, look, that would take the country backwards. You must remember that we cannot take away the ideology of the various parties as we do these kinds of discussions. The DA is committed to apartheid-type arrangement. You can see how they rule. You can see in areas where they rule. For instance, in the Western Cape, where they are pretty much in charge, all the African townships are squalor without fail. There's not even one token African township that they could even use as a model of what life could be under the DA. So you can see that when all the DA knows is to perfect a good life around areas where mainly white people live. That's all they know, is to govern white areas. What we need is a government that's going to take care of everyone, regardless of race or creed or anything.
Okay.
That's what we need. And the DA is not that party. The ANC, on the other hand, has totally failed to represent the aspirations of the people. This is why they are just doing so badly in these elections. And it's been the objective of the EFF to bring down the ANC to below 50 because we want more accountability. The ANC has used, or rather abused, its absolute majority to make sure that they evade accountability. For instance, if you look at the issue of Phala, for instance, no less than a senior chief justice that had pronounced that Mr. Ramaphosa has got a case to answer on a whole range of things, constitutional and otherwise.
But
and ANC used its majority to make sure that
probe
does
we understand you're not an ANC fan. You are indeed a defector from the party. But Mzwanele, with all the challenges that South Africa is facing, can the country actually afford to deal with a first-time coalition government that will really need to find its footing and will probably face some pretty serious infighting, to say the least?
No, look, I think what perhaps the world doesn't know is that the EFF is not necessarily the first time in government. For instance, in the city of Ekurhuleni, as an example, the EFF has shown its mettle there that it can actually govern. So to say what you're saying is totally not true. Also, the EFF does not operate on cadre deployment. The EFF government would be informed, would place people according to merit, according to skill base, according to ability to know the job. It's not going to be the fact that EFF is in charge, all of a sudden all EFF people are going to be doing whatever.
Okay.
If they are ANC people out there, we'll take them. If there's a good DA person in there, we'll take them. So but the EFF is interested in good governance, is not interested in putting its cadres everywhere. We're interested in the best people.
Yeah, let me get
that's
Lebohang's opinion on that then. I mean, do you think it's possible that, these small, and I'll just say lesser experienced parties in national leadership, if they are brought together in coalition, do you think it could genuinely be effective, given, the infighting that has, been part of their history with the parties that they used to be members of, I mean, mainly the ANC here? Do you think it could actually work effectively if they do come together as a coalition with these all ANC, with the smaller parties like the EFF and MK?
Oh, Andrea, I think these have been working at local government level, at municipal level, and I don't think we should overplay this infighting. And I keep hearing this, and in fact, it's not per se, it's not proven per se by the statistics. There are many effective coalitions across the country. We seem to prefer to highlight and spotlight the ones which are more conspicuously, perhaps rowdy, as it were. But I also think that there's a difference between infighting and the way that democracy should work. It should be robust. It should be, it should have its contestations. It is not supposed to be smooth. And I don't see smooth coalitions in Italy. I don't see smooth coalitions in Spain, in countries like Argentina, across the world, so-called developing or developed countries. I don't see them doing any better than South Africa.
And they're not, arguably, but some might say those countries are in a better position economically, to deal with their messier politics. It benefits no one in the end. But that's why I was asking, South Africa, this is an economy that is struggling right now. We've seen GDP per capita really plummet. The rand isn't doing particularly well, to say the least. It's not a country that's in a position to deal with incredibly, ineffective government now going forward. They really need strong leadership.
What you are missing in your analysis is that there may very well be new parties, but within these new parties, it's not new people. For instance, myself, I may be in the EFF, a new organization, but personally, I've been with government. I've been a director general in government. So you would find that the so-called new parties are actually populated by actually experienced people. So it's a complete
experienced people. But let me ask you then about your former boss, Jacob Zuma, who performed remarkably well, actually, with MK in this election, some would argue. Now, South Africa really saw its economy edge downward under Jacob Zuma's leadership. And also the corruption allegations, the issue of state capture, the Gupta saga. I mean, it really was a low point for post-apartheid South Africa. Yet here he is back to winning votes, and his party performed better than yours. Are these the people, the kind of leadership you want to see again in South Africa?
I think just look at the facts. In the past 7 years or 6 years or so of the Ramaphosa administration, what has happened? If what you've described is the truth, but here's the real truth. As we speak here and now, the issue of inequality under Ramaphosa is worse than it ever been in apartheid. As we speak here and now, the issue of unemployment is worse now with Ramaphosa than when it was under apartheid. The issue of load shedding is worse now with Ramaphosa than any other president that had ever been in South Africa. The issue of poverty, we're sitting with no less than 28 million living through one form of grant or another. All of this under Ramaphosa. There's absolutely nothing that Ramaphosa has done to show to back up or to corroborate the theory that you are busy painting. South Africa was not perfect, but what happened in the past 5-6 years has been atrocious. The entire economy has been wiped out because of the inept ANC government under Ramaphosa. So indeed, President Zuma might not have done very well in his time, but Ramaphosa is the worst president we've ever had since 1960, by the way.
Let me ask Lebohang about that, though, because Yeah, many will argue Cyril Ramaphosa was a disappointment for the ANC, that, maybe his time in leadership really hasn't done wonders at all for the economy, Lebohang. But some will say Zuma was worse. But now he has, well, let me ask you this. Would you characterize it as a comeback? And could he continue to rise? Would that be
In
good
fact,
for South Africa? Let Lebohang answer. Go ahead, Lebohang.
It depends on the people, Andrea. It actually depends on the will of the people. And I think that's the thing in this discourse that we miss out. I mean, I don't think it's up to Mzwanele or I even to determine who the people should vote for and whether the MK party, but it does reflect a particular appetite for something different. Now, I don't think that Zuma represents a departure. I think that it represents a deep frustration with the current status quo, but it also represents, unfortunately, a deep ethno-nationalism, which, and what I think also has happened is that a lot of people have underestimated Mr. Zuma's political savvy and his political shrewdness. I think that his term, these 9 years I don't think that they're clothed in glory. And I think in different ways, Minister Ramaphosa had to deal with and inherit that. He himself is not clothed in glory. This is absolutely true. But fair to say that also the COVID pandemic and there are other mitigating factors that hampered the economy. There are also choices that this current administration, potentially outgoing administration, could and should have had. Policy sovereignty, particular ways of dealing with the Reserve Bank, particular ways of dealing with currency, currency depreciation, quantitative easing. I mean, there are things that you can do. You can print money and put that money into particular key sectors to ensure that work is protected, jobs are protected, and also to ensure that those key industries that are labor absorbent are also protected. That didn't happen. And in fact, what happened instead was that after a few very superficial COVID measures were put in place, that thereafter the economy was allowed to free fall, and that unfortunately a lot of the infighting and the endemic corruption, the endemic culture of no accountability, which I have to say and disagree with my old colleague Mzwanele, were ushered in under the Zuma administration. There was a lot of pre-existing architectural rot and architectural deficiency. But I think to your previous point about whether younger parties are ready to govern, Andrea, I would ask, if not now, when? And I think it's very problematic to suggest that only certain key parties are entitled to govern or are more competent in governing. I think what we've now narrated suggests that the ANC per se is not the best to govern just because they've been doing it for a long time, especially because we should expect a generational shift. Being 30 years old in 1912, when the ANC was formed, is not the same as being 30 years old in 2024, 112 years later. We must expect shift. If I may finish, we must also expect that parties, that these mushrooming of parties is also indicative that there's a generation of people who do not resonate with the vision of the existing parties and allow them to flourish and allow them to perhaps cut their teeth.
Point taken. But Lebohang, I mean, tell me honestly, how much more can both the economy and the social fabric of South Africa take? Almost 1/3 of South Africans are now unemployed, and we've seen how vulnerable the country can become to violent outbreaks. Do you fear that if this government doesn't get itself together effectively and fast, that something could descend into something far worse?
Yeah, I mean, there's always this doomsaying discourse around South Africa. I think people are waiting for us to go into flames, and we're not going to. We refuse to do so. We fought too hard for us to do that. And even though there have been 1 or 2 skirmishes, and that is again, a factor of a vibrant democracy, a vibrant civic tradition, which is how we came out of, we overcame settler apartheid and colonial apartheid in one sense, although in many other senses, I think we're far from it, in fact. But I think that there's a particular resilience and a particular political resilience that South African people have, and our fiber is extremely strong. If we were going to tip over the edge, I suspect we would have done so by now. But I also think that this tip over edge discourse is one that comes with credit ratings agencies. It comes with certain international news agencies, unfortunately. I have stopped, for example, speaking to credit ratings agencies because I realized that what they prefer, rather than our own rigorous, well thought out, research and data, which is what people like me offer to the public discourse, they prefer to look at pictures of 20-year-old pictures on Google Images that shows supposedly that South Africa is in disarray, and that is a discourse that
I was more referring to what the violence we saw break out in 2021, when particularly
be that as it may,
yeah.
Be that as it may, Andrea, be that as it may, that is not a daily occurrence.
Okay.
That happened over a few days in 2021. One would think that this has been happening continuously. This is not, with due respect to my friends in DRC, this is not DRC. With due respect to my friends in Afghanistan, this is not Afghanistan. With due respect to my friends in Sudan or Somalia or countries that have very fragile social and political fibers, this is not any of those places.
So you feel South Africa is more stable than portrayed. But to be fair, I mean, I have heard other analysis that really says they are far more concerned with the future. There's this tinderbox element I've heard repeated. That people are worried about. You're not, and that's good. That's good to hear. I'd rather have that be the reality, most definitely.
But let me ask you, who are these people? Where do they get their data? And what are the other?
No, these are people that live in South Africa that have witnessed the situations and the townships in itself. They do feel, and I've actually been there myself, to be fair. I can feel the frustration among so many of the South African youth. That 30% unemployment rate is not to be scoffed at. These are people that have, they're frustrated, and that frustration can easily reach a boiling point. I've seen this not just in South Africa. To be fair, this would happen anywhere in the world. When young people especially, anyway, before we get on too far, I do hope you're right. I really do hope you're right. But I want to go back to Mzwanele because, we heard the mention of ethno-nationalism, and I'd like to have you comment on how much of a role that may have played in this election, especially given that Jacob Zuma did perform so well. Why was that? I mean, the EFF, this party has been around for a while. They are fighting for a lot of the same votes, and yet they fell behind. Is this because of ethno-nationalism? Is this Zulu support, diehard support for Jacob Zuma?
I think let's start here. You see, the EFF, for instance, gets mischaracterized as this militant organization that is irrational, when the truth of the matter is that the EFF has been the one organization that has been trying to hold the executive, including the Zuma administration, by the way, accountable. They are the ones that have been pushing for him to pay back the money. I
understand what you think the EFF is trying to do, but I'm asking about who voted for Jacob Zuma and why.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. That's the first point. The second point to make, which is very important, is because the EFF is hated because the EFF also deals with the capitalists that are busy denuding the country of its economy. The whole issue of transfer pricing, the whole issue of illicit financial outflows is what is depleting the economy of this country. So what is important? The 500 billion of COVID funds that we don't know what really happened to, which happened under Ramaphosa administration, the media seems to soft pedal on that. And then you get busy with other side shows. I think the important thing here is that the world must know that the South Africa is worse off with Ramaphosa at the helm, is worse off with the kind of ANC that is got at the helm. This is what we have. The ANC of Ramaphosa, as we have right now, is an ANC that has been actually destroying the country.
Okay. I was asking about ethno-nationalism, though, and why Jacob Zuma did gain so much support in this election. But let me finish then with Lebohang, because final thought then on where you think the presidency is actually going. Do you think the ANC, because it still has the biggest party in the government, can maneuver to keep Cyril Ramaphosa as president, or will they, if they change, they'll choose another candidate?
Interesting question. I don't think so. I think if the ANC had that capacity for that kind of agility, it wouldn't be the sort of organization that has seen several formations splinter off over the last 10, 12 years. The MK included, the EFF included, COPE included, and so forth. So I think if it was as responsive and as dynamic as that, perhaps we wouldn't even have seen these breakaways as well. But I think the other point of that is the question that always arises is whom. And unfortunately, I think what has been seen internally is that there's the perception that there's a deficit of talent. I don't agree with that characterization, but I do think that the appetite for perhaps an intergenerational, a younger, a more dynamic, a different perspective would not do the ANC any harm should they happen to maneuver, the presidency, which if they get the single largest amount of votes, they'll probably be able to do so. I think we're looking at 41% plus the sprinkles of it could be an EFF, it could be MK, it could even be the Patriotic Side, it could be the DA, and so on. So they need to figure out what renewal looks like, but they are a party who have not been great at renewing themselves at all.
Lebohang, that will have to be the final word for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank both of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.